So I want to talk about emotions and decision analysis today. And I know there'll be folks who will watch this recording later on who may not be exposed to decision analysis. And so I just want to say that the thing that really is amazing to me about decision analysis is we have a lot of decision science researchers who have looked at how we make decisions and they find that we suck. And decision analysis actually gives us a way to transcend that and do something about it. So it's so inspiring to me that this field is about making great decisions every single time. So I want to say a little bit about how I got into DA. And so there was that elevator conversation that Professor Howard alluded to, and that was it's very rare to have a professor just stop everything they're doing and just chat with you, and then Ron has this mic, he will speak into it and then look it up. So it says a lot more about Ron than I think it does about me. But the very first day of class, Professor Howard says, you cannot judge a decision from the outcome. And when I heard this, all kinds of light bulbs went off for me. And this is the idea that you can be driving drunk, that's a bad decision, and you may arrive home safe. That's a good outcome, but that doesn't make the bad decision a good one. So this was so profound for me because I grew up in India. And in India, if you've lived there for a couple of years, you're bound to come across this aphorism that you're competent only in action, not in outcomes. Therefore, focus on right action. So we learned this very early on. It's in the Bhagavad Gita. And then you enter the professional world, you find that you're judged only on outcomes. You get your promotion based on the results you deliver, not on the decisions you've made. So how do you make sense of this gap? And then I'm at Stanford University, which is at the heart of Silicon Valley. And at the heart of Stanford, Professor Howard's telling us you can't judge a decision from the outcome. And this was just absolutely amazing. So then I went up to him after class and I said, well, this is what the Indian philosophers have said for thousands of years. And he says, yeah, but they haven't applied this in finance, and we've worked out the details in the math. And that was just unbelievable. I knew I had to get into this subject. So that's how I got started in it. And I got into very deep into this topic of values. So before I dive deep into this, I want to say a few things about how people hear the word value. So most people, when they hear value, they hear cultural norms, for example, integrity. Then we have, in our community, very, very minuscule community, when we hear value, we often jump into objective functions for trade-offs or maximization and optimization. And for instance, time and money and other metrics that you may see fit in the decision you're looking at. But the third way in which people use value, and this is the exclusive way in which I will use the word value, is what's important to you right now. And that's absolutely the way that defines all of my work here. So that's that third way. I'm not using it in the first two ways. So when I ask myself, what is it that I value in decision analysis, three words come up for me. And these three words have been echoed by Professor Howard time and again. It's truth, clarity, and freedom. And truth is not just an empty word. Truth for me is my whole truth at this moment, my deepest truth that I can touch. So for instance, my whole truth right now standing here is I'm deeply honored to be here, and the fact that you're all giving me your attention, you're giving me basically a part of your life. This 1 hour or 75 minutes will never come back to you. And I'm deeply grateful. I'm also deeply grateful to have been able to do this work and share it with you. So that's just the reality of my situation right now. Clarity is, what am I going to do with this truth? And how am I going to bring it out in action? And can my action honor this deep truth? So what that means in our context right now is I have a responsibility to communicate clearly so that I don't steal your time. If I'm come out as confusing, then I wouldn't have used this time that you've given me in an appropriate manner. So that is clarity for me. I must strive to be clear in what I'm communicating. And if you're able to pull that off, then you get to the third value, which is freedom. We are all such victims or such prisoners of our conditioning based on our past experiences, based on how our minds are shaped, that most of the time we're just extending the past in a linear way into the future. And if we can break that conditioning, if we can tap into our deepest truth in this moment, we have an opportunity to create something that's truly authentic, that we are building something from our depth. So for instance, my conditioning might be that, hey, I'm giving you a talk, I'd like your approval, but that's not authentic with my truth right now. My deepest truth is, I'm so grateful to be sharing this that it's a privilege. I'm enjoying sharing this stuff, and even if no one were to show up, I would really enjoy talking to the walls in the hope that someday they'll inspire students with this stuff. I truly feel that right now. So that's the space, that's what truth, clarity, freedom mean for me, and decision analysis is a complete embodiment of this. And this pattern will play out continuously in my talk, and you'll see how. So this is one of my favorite poets, Rabindranath Tagore. He got the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. And he has this wonderful quote. He says, "The small truth has words that are clear. The great truth has great silence." And this means a lot to me. And I'm going to be double clicking on the great silence. That is not just poetry for me. That's also methodology. And you will see how this works out as we go along. Now, when you talk about great silence, when you try to go beyond your conditioning, usually the yoga traditions talk about meditation. You see how your mind works, and you're able to create a space where you can go beyond that conditioning. I find that you can do that same thing with decision analysis, and that is very, very powerful when we can listen in a very different way. You'll see how this unfolds. So I got started with my PhD work, as Professor Howard alluded. It was with the Stanford Police Department. This is an amazing organization right here on this campus, and you can go see them. And this was in 2006, where I learned that unlike what we read in the media and what we see of other police departments, where they often define their role, their identity as law enforcers, the Stanford Police Department defines itself based on its values. And the two operating values are public safety and education. That's quite different from law enforcement, although law enforcement is the vehicle by which they do this. So when I discovered this through an ethnographic study, I started asking myself the question, well, now what do I do with these values? So in decision analysis, we are in the world of action, clarity of action. There's a decision to be made. Whereas this is a conversation at a deeper layer. This is a conversation of being. And in the space of being, there is no action, there is just being. So when you can connect the two together, then it's very powerful. It's in this space, there is no uncertainty. There is 100% commitment. There's you are it. And from it comes creation that is very powerful, very inspiring. This is your reason for existence. In the world of doing, there is uncertainty, and you have to use your wisdom and your resources wisely. And when you can connect the two, that's when the magic happens. That's when the truth and the clarity come together. So when you start with this foundation, the metrics that you would use in this police department are completely different, because they have to bring these two values to light. So you can see how these two, the idea of truth and clarity is extremely important. So this led to my work on value mapping, because I remember going to Professor Howard saying, I actually don't know what the word value means after spending a couple of years in decision analysis. And then he pointed me to this man, Robert Hartman, who, as it turns out, taught at MIT one summer when Professor Howard, 50 years back, was an undergraduate student. And that was it. And then he never came back to MIT. And 50 years later, I got the benefit of this man's wonderful wisdom. So Robert Hartman was the founder of a field called formal axiology. And axiology is the study of the nature of value. And his personal life story was that he was in Germany when the Nazi era was just beginning. And he just couldn't take it. He saw what society was heading toward, and he fled Germany. He went to the UK, then came to the US. And he dedicated his whole life to building a mathematical calculus that does not devalue life, that does not glorify death, neither does it trivialize death. And that sounds like an impossible task, but he pulled it off. And what he came up with really influenced my own research. So I used a lot of that in building value maps and value diagrams. And I have written about his work. So if you're interested, I'll give you the slides. You can check this article. And the provocative question there is, are 2 lives saved twice as good as 1? Does that question even make sense? And that's the kind of question that he has a convincing answer to. But the part that I really want to focus on, in his body of work, is he started looking into what is intrinsic for all of us, intrinsic values. And the way you know that you are valuing something intrinsically is that it will become inseparable from who you are. That was a very big idea, very interesting idea. So I started listening for inseparability. And when that happened, I stumbled onto this different kind of listening altogether. So when I went back to my dissertation, which I had written 7 years back, and I found this quote in there, which I'll read to you. As an observer, and this is an observer of value mapping. So I was talking to a lot of people, mapping out their intrinsic values and noticing what is happening in the process. As an observer, the researcher, that is myself, notes that when the subject, this particular subject in a case study, discovered the intrinsic value, he immediately went silent for some seconds. When he spoke next, the researcher got the impression that he felt he was finally being understood. This assenting silence has been experienced by the researcher with other subjects as well, and might be a clue that we are touching on ground that is indeed of an intrinsic nature to the subject. And I found this hundreds of times. Every single time I do a value mapping, whenever we touch something intrinsic, it becomes hard for people to articulate. And yet, this is not a passive silence. This great truth has great silence. This is the silence where you can see the fire within you. This fire, it gives life to all of your creative work. It gives you direction. And that is just magic when you can feel it. And I posit that you can feel this. So then I started noticing some very unusual things that started happening in the process of this value mapping. So first, when the person I'm mapping touched their intrinsic values, they would feel very inspired, and then something would happen to me. I would feel very deeply connected to that person, as though I was living their value. There's like an as if play in my mind, and all these physical sensations in my body, which was just unreal. Like it happens every single time. And then the subjects would find this whole mapping process deeply meaningful. Even though they struggle with the words, they don't exactly know what word to use, but whatever phrase we settle on, when they look back at it, it's like they're looking at a picture of their soul, and they're like, oh my God, this is, for the first time, many of them have told me, first time I feel I've been understood. And that was also pretty crazy. So all of this happened, and then I graduated, and then I was like, okay, what do I do with this stuff? So I started working with a nonprofit. So I completely erroneously assumed that nonprofits will care about values. For-profits couldn't care less. This was completely wrong, by the way. and so I worked for 9 months with a very, very big foundation that focuses on protecting the Amazon rainforests. And I was building a portfolio management system for them to figure out where to invest. And I started with this question that I basically learned in this research, that you want to start with who are you, or who do you want to be, and with the value mapping process. And after that, it shaped my metrics, it shaped all of my analysis. And at the end of 9 months, one of the board members says, all this stuff you've done with the analytics, it's good as far as it goes, but the really valuable stuff was the value mapping piece. And so I was very conflicted about it. And then like 9 months of effort and all my quantitative skills that I wanted to show off and didn't make a dent. But the value mapping piece, that's the only thing he picked. On the other side, I was like, okay, that's really cool. That was my research work. That's awesome that it's practical. So I was conflicted about it for a while. And then the nonprofit, like my career didn't really take off in the nonprofit sector. I ended up joining SmartOrg, where I worked for 6.5 years as head of product. And SmartOrg is a company that applies decision analysis in R&D environments. So help people figure out where should you put your biggest bets and where outcomes will come after several years. So at SmartOrg, in my very first project with the CEO of SmartOrg, I was the understudy. We went to Scholle Packaging, and this was a plastic packaging company. And through a series of twists and turns, we found that they could not make progress on strategy because they hadn't answered the question, who do we want to be? And so we did the value mapping exercise with the same method, that I'm listening for that great silence so that I can find their great truth. And David and I found that they had 4 values: safe, natural, economic, and sustainable. That was their core identity. and they hadn't known to bring it out. By economic, they meant affordable, that their packaging makes food more affordable, more safe, more natural, and planet is more sustainable because you don't need to grow as much food because of their packaging. So 4 things. This is, the packaging delivers on these values, and they exist to deliver on these values, and money is an instrumental value. They're not here to make profits. They need the profits in order to deliver on these 4 values. And by the way, this is public information. This is from their website. Even after all these years, this was, I think, 7 years back. And this is the one thing that really stuck. This is the identity of the company. It's on their front website. So this is something that's happened again and again. And so when this experience happened, this is Dr. David Matheson. He's got decades of experience doing strategy consulting work. And by the way, he was a student just like you guys, many of you guys in these chairs, and he was a TA and a PhD student of Professor Howard. And his initial reaction to all of this was, this is very good, but only Somik can do this mapping piece in this way. And initially, he told all of us, don't pay too much attention. Don't just get distracted with the main business because we don't really understand how to use this stuff. But then he does a lot of work with executives in very large organizations, and he came across these situations where these teams were trying to do strategy work without first answering who they wanted to be. So he did this in his own way, and he found, so the word he uses is strategy generating values. He says, listening for strategy generating values is now a part of my standard consulting toolkit. And that term, the reason he's used this term is that he finds that when you listen in this way and you pull out what's the state of being, that whatever traits come out, whatever values come out of that, end up giving you direction for your strategy. They generate your strategy. If you say, in fact, I've seen this again and again, if you tell people to double their profits or revenues, they only produce junk. Like the brain just shuts down. But if you ask people to deliver on their values, they can't stop giving you ideas because that's where the generative fuel is coming from. So this has huge implications. Like if you want to be a successful business and you haven't thought about this, you can't be successful. I don't see how you can be successful. So this got validated at so many levels. And I wanted to also show this slide because I have my own way of doing value mapping, and I have some frameworks that I like, but it's really not about my approach. The idea is that if you listen in this deep way, whatever intellectual framework you like will get deepened, and you will find your own path and your own words that will be deeply meaningful for whoever you're working with and for yourself. So that's really the point of this. It's not just the framework, it's this listening that I'm talking about. And so when all of this started happening, I asked myself the question, what's going on here? And why are the mapper and the mappee so inspired by these conversations? Is this connection that I'm feeling with the other person real? What's happening to me physically? And I believe that the person I'm mapping is also feeling it. Can I validate that in some way? And is it all just a big mental game I'm playing to believe what I want to believe? I'm a big sucker for values. If you tell me a value story, oh my God, you just made my day. It'll make me emotional. So am I just fooling myself? So I realized, and at that time I was reading all these amazing brain mapping studies that people are doing. What would I give to just get into one of those MRI scanners and map my brain and the other person's brain, put both of us in the scanner, see what's going on? So all of these questions came up for me, and finally in 2017, I started looking into neuroscience. But before I go there, I want to talk a little bit about the cognitive side of decision making. So as students of this class very well know, that's Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, Nobel laureate in economics, and their seminal paper was Heuristics and Biases with 44,000 citations. And you've all read this paper by now. And then there's the international bestseller book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So amazing contribution to the field. In 4 decades of this stuff, they've clearly demonstrated that we basically suck at decision making. We have so many biases because of our conditioning. So, and that goes back to the freedom, right? Like, how do we get to our freedom? We need to really understand the ways in which we sabotage our own freedom. So all of that is good. And by the way, this is counting. So he had a couple dozen biases, and now we have 217 decision-making biases, 53 social biases, 54 memory biases, and that's an infographic from Wikipedia. It just is exploding, this field. So the bottom line of all of this is, when you come back to decision analysis, we say that the good decision is one where you feel balanced and achieve equanimity. You're facing stormy seas, and crossing those stormy seas is really, really hard. And decision analysis is what gets you there. So that's all good. But then there's also this implicit message lying in all of this cognitive science stuff, which is don't trust your emotions when making decisions. They will misguide you. Even though nobody says this explicitly, we have started to condition ourselves to believe this. And so I feel that that's good. That's very good in as far as it goes, but it's an incomplete picture because it's missing 4 decades of neuroscience research. So let's dive into that. But before we even go to the last 4 decades, let's go even earlier to 1848. And this is a picture of Vermont Cavendish. Before there was just rock, before this rail line existed. So people were in the business of blowing up rocks. How do you explode a rock in 1848? So you drill a hole, you put in gunpowder, you put in a fuse, then you put sand and then tamp the sand and light the fuse and boom, you can blow up the rock. On this particular day, there was a guy named Phineas Gage who was the foreman who was leading all these operations, and he had the hole drilled, the gunpowder was put in, the fuse was put in, and then just before his assistant could put in the sand, both of them got distracted. Something happened, and he forgot that the sand had not been put in. So then he took his rod and just tamped it. Now what happens when you hit iron on rock? You get a spark, and spark in gunpowder, boom. So there was a big explosion, and that rod flew out with such force that it basically went through his face and came out. It exited from his prefrontal cortex. Okay. Now the remarkable thing in all of this is he was conscious after the accident. He was taken to the doctor's office, and the entire time he was able to have a conversation with the doctor. And so this is the first time that people realize, oh my God, there's a part of the brain that we actually don't understand. This guy didn't die. He didn't get knocked out. He was conscious. What is this part of the brain? And this is a picture of him after the accident. You can see that he lost complete vision in one eye. But other than that, his physical attributes were just normal. Like he could do everything a normal human being can do. But something about him changed drastically. And this is from the book Descartes' Error. For a long time, most everybody, John Harlow was his doctor, they believed that the portion of the brain traversed was, for several reasons, the best fitted of any part of the cerebral substance to sustain the injury. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is an amazing book written by Professor Antonio Damasio. He is the director of the Brain and Creativity Institute at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles. His wife is also a part of this, and she did a lot of the neuroscience work on reconstructing what happened to Phineas Gage's brain. And so going back to that quote, nothing could be further from the truth. What happened? What happened was Gage's personality changed drastically. Before, this guy was a confident guy. He could make jokes. He could pull a team together. After this accident, he just could not relate socially to anyone. He would use foul language all the time, and women were advised not to be in his company. That era was like that, and basically he couldn't hold on to his job. He lost his job, and then he spent some time. He had a very tragic life after that. He would go in circuses and with that, displaying that rod that went through his head, and he didn't have a long life. He died within 10 years of that accident. So this was a very, very interesting case for neuroscience, which brought to light the prefrontal cortex. And so basically the bottom line was this: he had a very hard time making decisions that were good for him. And then fast forward several decades, and we had this modern Phineas Gage. And he, in the book Descartes' Error, he's given the name Elliot. So this guy had a meningioma which was pushing against his brain tissue. The tumor was surgically removed, but the frontal lobe tissue was actually damaged. And his cognitive abilities, just like Gage, was completely intact. And they noticed a total change of personality. He became terrible in executive function and could not hold jobs. He made decisions that bankrupted him, which caused 2 divorces. Finally, Social Security stopped paying his benefits, saying, "Oh, he looks normal. What's the problem? He's just faking it." That's when Damasio and his team got into it, and they started looking at it. And so on the left here, all the tests they did, which he passed with flying colors. So He had a very good attention and working memory, short-term, long-term, no problem, cognitive ability, no problem, arithmetic, no problem, new language ability, no problem. He could generate alternatives, no problem. He even passed special tests for frontal lobe dysfunction. But something was very wrong with him. He was unable to decide properly, especially in personal and social matters. He reported that he had no more strong emotions. So before this happened, he would have opinions about topics and which would drive strong emotions for him. He just didn't feel those emotions anymore on those same topics. And he could reason through problems, he could just not make a decision. Now think about that for a moment. That is really powerful. And so Damasio has this quote in his book. At the end of one session, after he had produced an abundant quantity of options for action, all of which were valid and implementable, Elliot smiled, apparently satisfied with his rich imagination, but added, and after all this, I still wouldn't know what to do. And so Damasio calls this predicament to know but not to feel. So he knows what are the options, even though he uses the word at the end, no. What he really means is this guy couldn't feel his way to the decision. He couldn't make the decision. So what neurobiology is telling us about emotion and reason, Damasio points out two very important things. The first is that seemingly normal reason can be disturbed by subtle biases rooted in emotion. That's not controversial. We have studied that ad nauseum with the work of Tversky and Kahneman and the biases. But the second part is really interesting for us. Reduction in emotion may constitute an equally important source of irrational behavior. So we need to really revise our old school understanding of the human brain. So what is the old school understanding? It's that the old brain core handles basic biological regulation of emotions down in the basement, while up above the neocortex deliberates with wisdom and subtlety. Upstairs in the cortex there is reason and willpower, while downstairs in the subcortex there is emotion and all that weak fleshy stuff. And the new view is that the apparatus of rationality, traditionally presumed to be neocortical, does not seem to work without that of biological regulation, traditionally presumed to be subcortical. Nature appears to have built the apparatus of rationality not just on top of the apparatus of biological regulation, but also from it and with it. That's really interesting, that without emotions, we can't seem to make decisions. Right? Now here's another part which really stood out for me. He looks at developmental sociopaths and says, developmental sociopaths are well known to all of us from the daily news. The threshold at which their emotions kick in, when they do, is so high that they appear unflappable and are, from their self-reports, unfeeling and uncaring. They are the very picture of the cool head we were told to keep in order to do the right thing. In cold blood, and to everybody's obvious disadvantage, including their own, sociopaths often repeat their crimes. They are in fact yet another example of a pathological state in which a decline in rationality is accompanied by a diminution or absence of feeling. Very, very powerful stuff. And so all of this builds up to, well, can you demonstrate this in the lab? And this is the big contribution that Damasio and his colleagues have made to the field. It's called the somatic marker hypothesis. This is the most influential paper in their field. And you can see almost 2,700 citations. And then they followed it up with a neural theory of economic decision. That's also a very influential paper. So what does this paper say? So they look at patients who have ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage and also amygdala damage. And so kind of pointed out these brain regions. So that's like, if I was standing this way, that's the prefrontal cortex in the front. So the hypothesis says that if you're looking at a prospect, and a prospect is a future situation where you've made a decision and something happens, an outcome, your body develops a gut reaction. It comes up with an image of a bad outcome that was stored somewhere, and it plays itself in the theater of your mind and your body. And this, let me be careful when I say that. This image plays out in the theater of your body. Even though you feel it as, oh, my mind is seeing this, that's actually happening in your body. And so the word soma is Greek for body, and somatic means occurring in the theater of the body. And the word marker is because it's marking an image of some reaction that you've had in the past. So this occurs before you make a decision, so there's still room for decision analysis. You don't have to act on this. But what it does is it drastically reduces your options. So for instance, if I want to get rich and I was like, well, I could rob a bank today, I was like, oh, no, that's not even on the table. Okay, so that's what these markers do for us. They take obviously dumb ideas off the table. So in short, somatic markers are a special instance of feelings generated from secondary emotions. Those emotions and feelings have been connected by learning to predicted future outcomes of certain scenarios. So it's very interesting. These are not primary emotions in the sense that they're not in the present moment, but they're coming out of stored learning. And so then they went further to study how this learning happens. So it turns out this hypothesis is testable. So because it's happening in your body, we should be able to detect it. And because this is an autonomic nervous system response, what happens when you feel these emotions, basic emotions, is your body perspires just a little bit more. And when it perspires a little bit more, the conductance of your skin changes. So if I connect two electrodes, like I have connected it, I'm actually mapping myself right now, you can detect when these emotions are going up and down. And so, and these markers, and so they developed a gambling task. And this is very well, like this instrumentation is much cheaper than MRI machines, and it's been around for a couple decades, very, very well used in the research community. And so they developed this gambling task, which is now called the Iowa gambling task. I don't know why they call it Iowa, maybe one of them came from Iowa, who knows. But the idea is very simple, that you have you have 4 decks of cards. 2 of them are seeded to be high immediate gain, but large future loss. And the other 2 are seeded so that they give you a low gain and a smaller loss. And so when normal people play this game, they're given a pot of money, and there's a fee to get, to draw from any deck you want, and then you get either a penalty or a reward. And you keep playing, normal people will quickly learn that, oh, these 2 decks, A and B, are not a good idea because they get dinged so bad. So they learn over time that even though the reward is higher, the penalty is really bad. So they switch their strategy and they stick to this, and they get better outcomes over a long run. So then the question was, what happened with people who had damage in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala? So as I mentioned, the normal people learned over time to switch to the safer decks, but the ventromedial patients did not. They always chose myopically, as did the amygdala patients. And both the ventromedial patients and the normal, actually normal are not patients, they registered skin conductance response when getting rewards or penalties. Now this is a very interesting part. So what they did was they measured skin conductance response at the time you get the reward or the penalty. So that's an immediate present moment response. So that connects to what happened right now. But then they also found that just before you pick the next card, there was another skin conductance response happening, and that's coming from what you have stored. So as you are building into this game, like you're playing this over and over again, the brain starts to form patterns. And those patterns are forming precisely because of these emotional markers. It's saying, I don't want that outcome. So you start to see a difference between the good deck and the bad deck. And that difference is pretty significant. And at some point, the cognitive faculty kicks in, says, I can't ignore this anymore. And then people switch their strategy. Turns out that the ventromedial patients were getting the skin response. They didn't like the penalty and they liked the reward, but they were unable to learn from it because of the brain damage. So they could not use emotions for learning. And that's why they never changed their strategies. And the amygdala patients, they had a more severe situation. They didn't even get the skin conductance response, they didn't show it, even when getting the penalty and the reward. So learning was out of the question. And this is just absolutely fascinating stuff. And it tells us that our very apparatus of learning is connected biologically to emotions. So if you short circuit those emotions, if you make a practice of saying, oh, emotions are always going to misguide me, I'm going to ignore them, you will very quickly find that you're in deeper confusion because you don't know which way is right for you. You may know all the alternatives, you don't know which one you will pick. And it's a very tragic situation to be in. And that's kind of funny because it also corresponds with what I've noticed when I'm doing these mapping sessions, that when people are connecting to their emotions and they're really feeling deeply, the confusion, the fog kind of lifts. They kind of know their way forward. It's really weird. It's like there's a knowing which is at a very, very deep level. Now, I have to say that there are points of departure here because the hypothesis, I shouldn't overstretch this, it's strictly defined in a negative sense. It's only looking at negative emotions like fear and whatever. And my work has been in the positive direction. So the other thing I'll say is Damasio points out that there are two possibilities in interpreting these results. And one is that the cognitive estimate, or what will give you a better reward in the future, it automatically connects with a somatic state. So somehow mysteriously you make an executive decision and it happens to be that the emotions trigger in that way. That could be one possibility. The other is there's a covert non-conscious estimate that precedes any cognitive process on the topic. And that's the other possibility. It's very interesting. So all of this led me back to the questions I started with. So first thing is, do I want to get into an MRI machine? No, that's too expensive, too difficult. I'd rather first start with skin conductance and see what that tells me. And I want to see whether these skin conductance responses can be seen in these value mapping sessions. What do I find there? And this is outside the realm that has been defined by the somatic marker hypothesis, because I actually, this is like the tip of the iceberg. They haven't even looked at the difference between negative and positive emotions. So I looked around and I found a German device, this one that's on my fingers here, and it's the Mindfield eSense. It's under $100, connects to your phone, and I have it recording in 2 phones in my pockets. And this is my particular framework right now, but you can use your own, it doesn't matter. And the way I look at it is when I'm mapping these conversations, I look at 3 energies that people have. One is, what is their intellectual energy? What's their emotional energy, where the juice lies? And what's their unstoppable energy, their habit that they can't change, that they can't stop? And if you have these 3 mapped out, you get a kind of clear sense of who the person is or what they stand for. And somehow just 3 phrases, the answers to these 3 questions, it's unbelievable that you could capture a person's spirit with 3 phrases. People look at it and say, yep, that's me. That's me. If you show this to people, that would be me. So I continue to be astonished by the power of this. So this is when I tried it out. I met this very young guy. I'll call him Mark. He had just graduated from a program in mathematics and didn't know what to do with his life. And so, well, instead of looking at alternatives, I'd rather do a value mapping conversation to figure out what you stand for. So we begin the conversation. And by the way, my methodology was that in this piece of paper, and I'll expand it in a moment, I was noting the times at which certain things were happening within me. So if I felt certain things, I would note it down that, oh, I'm feeling it now. And what's the timestamp, so that I could look back at the markers and see if there's any correlation. And I also noted down important things that he was saying at certain times. So we started the conversation at 12:34 p.m. He says, well, I'm not very attached generally to anything, but I'm slowly learning that I'm actually driven by emotions. I'm like, okay, that's good. So I asked him, well, what's really meaningful for you? What moves you? What makes you emotional? What makes you upset? And he says, when people feel powerless around me, I feel really, really bad about it. That's a tough one for me to deal with. I really get angry, actually, when people feel powerless, because people are not powerless. That's how passionate he was about this. So you can see that he's in the orange and I'm in the blue, okay? And so I'm now listening deeply for where his juice is. And so his starts rising and mine also starts rising. Then he talks about agency and humanity as being very meaningful, that people should have their free agency. And then we get talking about the opioid epidemic, and he talks about how that just breaks his heart, that people are getting into this because they don't see a way forward, and that just kills him. That why? I mean, people should feel that power within them. And at this time, look, you can see he's speaking, and I can feel something is happening, and you can see my peaks are in there. So I have this point, a facilitator notes a peak like for myself, and there it is. And then we start going into the habit piece, and somewhere around here, I think we mapped his habit as poetry. So very early on, when he was a kid, he used to just write poems. And he was very good at it, so his parents would show it off to their friends, and he got very annoyed by it. So he told his parents to stop, they didn't listen, so he just stopped writing poems. And the problem was he's a poet, so he found other ways to find poetry. And so for him, mathematics was poetry. It was the poetry of nature. He looks anywhere, he sees patterns, he sees beauty in life, and he can't stop it. That's just how his brain seems to be conditioned. So we found that, still at a peak, At this point, I decided to put my facilitator hat on to get into the conversation of the head, which is the confusing part for him, which is what should he do in life? What is his intellectual energy going to be? And so you can see my readings start tanking because now I'm not connecting to his heart anymore. I'm trying to look at alternatives. And so we quickly eliminated psychiatry or psychology. We said, well, it's not, it doesn't go the distance for him. And we noted empowering the powerless was his heart. Doesn't go the distance in that. Then we looked at public policy versus entrepreneurship. And so public policy was pretty interesting for a while. We talked about it and we said, well, at the end of the day, you do an analysis with your mathematical skills and you try to empower the powerless. But then if the government ignores what you've done, that's it. That's the end of the story. So he realized, well, that wouldn't cut it for him. So he ended up settling on entrepreneurship, that he was going to focus on being an entrepreneur because that gave the space, the context for him to empower the powerless. And also, the poetry piece was very interesting, that poets are introverts. So you put him in a room of 50 people, he is like a fish out of water. He hates going to these big parties. But have him one-on-one with a meaningful conversation or about his mission, he couldn't stop talking. So, the implication of this is don't change yourself. Don't try to get these social skills. And he didn't like entrepreneurship because he had this public image of people who are just social animals. And I said, well, no, Steve Jobs never went to parties. The guy was completely introverted. So then he was like, oh yeah, that's right. And so that block lifted from his heart. And this guy's an amazing kid. So he was actually looking at the option of going to Liberia to help villagers get plugged into the market so they can get out of the economic powerlessness. So that's the kind of, he's not our Silicon Valley kind of entrepreneur. He'll go to Africa and do something with entrepreneurship there. And this was the rationale behind it. So he got the logic for who he is in his decision making. And there there's a scrappy piece of paper. I told him to look at this piece of paper. This is, you can see it says here, entrepreneurship, poetry, and empower the powerless. And when I showed it to him, I said, what do you feel? And I allowed myself to feel along with him. And you see, zoop, his is already high up and it shot up even more. And mine also shot up. So literally, this is the moment where I feel such a deep connection with this guy, such love and such energy that I'm so honored that he would allow me to enter his world in this way. So this is like a new definition for ending the conversation on a high. We started one place, we ended another place. So that was one experience there. And I want to give a few, so this was his map, entrepreneurship, poetry, and empowering the powerless. But I want to give a few caveats. Remember that, scientists, this is my personal experiment, sample size of 1 in a sense. We need to repeat this reliably. It's a great research topic. If I were doing a second PhD, you know what I would be studying. But if any of you are looking for topics, highly invite. This is completely untapped, uncharted territory. It would be wonderful for us to get into this. So now I want to focus the last segment of my talk on coming back to decision analysis. All of this is great. What does it mean for DA? So let's go back to the implicit bottom line. So remember these 3 things that I said. Turns out a good decision is one where you feel balanced and achieve equanimity. Again, the word feel just looms front and center for me. What I've noticed, people doing this, being in this field for many years, if you notice Professor Howard, you notice David Matheson at SmartOrg, or my current boss, Clint Corver, who was here on Tuesday, whenever I see them making decisions, they know when they've arrived at equanimity and they know the way forward. They feel it. And that was a big thing. It's not about knowing intellectually, it's about feeling it in your gut. And this third piece, don't trust your emotions when making decisions, not so fast. There's a richer, more complex story. We shouldn't be hasty in dismissing our emotions. That's a big learning from all of this. So what if our feelings don't just misguide us, but they can also guide us? If we have this rigorous method of conversation, what if the purpose of decision analysis is to take complexity off the table so we can focus on who we want to be? What if there's a different hypothesis here? I'm just going to make something up. What if there's a confused gut syndrome where the gut will tell you what to do, but the problem is you can't feel your gut because the problem is so complicated? And what decision analysis does is it takes that complexity off so you can feel your way through when facing complex decisions. And only when you can feel again, can you actually make a decision. What if that's what's actually happening? And so I had the opportunity to do this. And in fact, the funny thing is, ever since I graduated, this is how I have been practicing decision analysis. So when I was working for the nonprofit for 9 months, the question was which countries to enter in the Amazon basin using forest carbon credits. And I start every analysis with who do you want to be? And the answer I got was, we're not sure. So, okay, so there's a clouded gut here. We don't know which way forward. So I said, no problem, DA to the rescue. So here, I mapped their values and the parts where they were feeling their emotions individually. And there were some people in the team who cared about forest cover, like, more forest is better. Some people said, no, it's not forest, just more forest. It's contiguous forests and there's got to be a threshold, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. So what if you have an exponential model there? And some people felt, oh, it's not just the forest, it's also biodiversity. And so we said, okay, we'll count mammals, birds, and amphibians. We call it the MBA count, trading off against forest cover. And some people said, no, that's wrong, because it's not just how many species there are, it's the density, the richness of dispersion. Okay, we'll do species density trading off against forest cover. And then and yet another group said, well, it's not even that. All ecoregions are equally valuable. Who are we to say one is more valuable than the other? All right, we'll do that too. And then we built this is like the 9-month simulation model, all of that stuff. So these are, let's say, 4 program officers in different areas. And they had their own beliefs with uncertainty probability assessments about where they'd be more effective. So we did those as well. And then we were able to show, given all these value positions, these are the implications. And so when they looked at the resulting decision and they reflected back on their values, they finally realized, oh, out of these 5 value positions, 4 are not for us. And they could even tell me, that foundation over there, this is their value system. But we couldn't tell you before this analysis. It took the analysis for us to realize, oh yeah, this is what they would do. For us, one of these is our value system, and that's where we need to focus our conversation. Then the question is, what do we believe and what are the differences and so on. So literally they taught me this amazing approach that the decision analysis is so powerful because it connects you to what your values really are. That clarity emerges, you're not confused anymore. So this happened at that foundation, and the result was clarity on value position. We repeated this at the Nature Conservancy over the next, this was a 3-year project now. And here too, this was done with David Matheson at SmartOrg. And the game changer of our approach was the analysis takes complexity off the table so you can focus on who you want to be. We said this until this point, imagine people have their baby, their pet projects. They've been doing this for years, and you're saying, oh, my decision analysis with these metrics says you're going to kill this project. You need to kill this project because it doesn't have value. How is that going to get received, right? And they're like, you don't understand. Your heart is somewhere else. You guys will just leave after you guys are just consultants. Whereas now we're saying, no. You can still follow the path you want. You can still do what our analysis says you shouldn't do. The difference is you're not doing that with your eyes open, with authenticity. So you're able to, remember the truth, clarity, and freedom? The truth is we believe that certain, these metrics are not capturing the full value of this. They're capturing certain things that are important. You believe this is outside of that, and that's okay. And you can still take the project you want because our metrics are always going to be limited. That's okay. We are telling the whole truth in this situation. And suddenly that clarity gave them the freedom. It said, oh my God, this is the burden lifted off my shoulder. You're not going to kill my projects. I have the freedom to decide. The analysis won't decide for me. And guess what happens when people have that freedom? The team developed an intuition for which projects were really valuable, and they voluntarily offered some of their own projects for termination. That's like a miracle. The amount of attachment with which we work every day, this is, when this happens, it's just, it's like a game changer. My God, I honor these people for being able to get there, and I feel like the process had a big role in this. So that's the power of decision analysis. So it's not just for nonprofits. This has now become the standard way in which SmartOrg approaches its decision analysis. And not just at SmartOrg, at Ulu Ventures, where I work now, this is a VC firm. This is such a big deal in us respecting the entrepreneur. So just yesterday, I had to write a tough email to an entrepreneur. We were passing on this guy's baby. And the beauty of decision analysis is I could connect to my deepest truth, which was this entrepreneur is awesome. The numbers don't pencil out, and the numbers don't pencil out because they are our numbers and we are ignorant about this guy's domain. It's not because something is lacking in this person, it's something is lacking in us. And decision analysis gives us the language of customization, of personalization. What we call quote unquote subjective is actually the language of truth. This is our truth right now. And it's a good decision for us because we are ignorant about your domain, and it would be too expensive for us to gain that knowledge. So we apologize. We're going to pass on you. And that has no reflection on how good this business is, how good you are. And when you give that message as opposed to, sorry, you failed, imagine what it does. Imagine what it does to the entrepreneur. So this allows us to respect not just who the entrepreneur is, but also ourselves, because now we are connected to our deepest truth. This is the bigger, broader truth. And one of the things that I've always remembered Professor Howard saying in the ethics class is, telling the truth is easy. It's finding the truth that's hard. What is the truth? And DA is a much deeper process when you make that as a part of the analysis. That is, every analysis should deepen our own truth every single time. So even decision quality looks different when we apply this approach. So decision quality, for those of us in the room who've never seen this, we call it the 6 elements of decision quality, where we want to have a useful perspective on a frame. And by the way, I have coded this with cool head and warm heart. So the communication of decision analysis has largely been from the head perspective. Although if you look at practitioners who've been in the field for long, they bring both head and heart. It's just that the official communication doesn't reflect it. So we talk about useful perspective. Are you boiling the ocean? Or are you focusing on the right problem? And then are you looking at distinct directions, different alternatives? Are you looking at credible sources of information? Are they material to your decision? Are you using clear metrics? Are you using insightful reasoning? This used to be called logic. And do you have, what about commitment to action? Are you actually committed to doing something? If you got actionable plans, what can you do next? Is it clear? When you deepen this with the heart, the emotions, it's not just about useful perspective, it's about meaningful inquiries. The question that you're asking, is it actually meaningful? If it's not meaningful, it's a waste of everybody's time. So whenever you're doing a decision analysis, always ask, is the question we're answering really, really meaningful to the community of people that's working on this problem? Are your possibilities, the alternatives you're looking at, are they not just distinct, are they interesting? Would people say, I would love to try this alternative out, it would be really cool. There's a juice in there that flows. And I have found that when you start with values, when you connect with your deep ground of being, the alternatives you generate from there somehow always inspire us. So those alternatives are more likely to succeed because you will stay committed to them. So, and then information is not just about credible sources, material sources, but are they compelling? And sometimes information has such a compelling nature when it's tied to your values that you don't need to do any more analysis. You're like, okay, I know what to do next. And values, the metrics piece is fine on the head side. The heart side is, what is your noble purpose in this decision? Why are you here? Who do you want to be in your life? And so I will redefine success. Success is not how much money you make. Success is in whatever work you're doing. Are you expressing your nature in the truest manner possible? That which is within, can it come out in the world and have a life of its own? And if you can't succeed in that, then there is no success. That's the only success in my books that counts. And everything else, money and resources, is in service of bringing that amazing thing that you have within you out into the world. This piece here on integration is not just about the logic you're using, but what is the narrative you're using that will make this logic clear to the community of people you're working with, so that everybody can go along and row in the same direction. Now, if it was just hard, people have used narratives to sway people and do really harmful things. So the head is just as important as the heart. You do want to find the right answer, do the heavy lifting there, but then you also need to connect it to the heart so that it becomes clear to everybody. Because we need to feel the decision, we need to feel your clarity. And then aligned intention on the heart side here, it's not just about knowing how to get from point A to point B in all these steps, but when you're almost guaranteed to hit bumps in the road. What happens then? Do you just give up? And that's when, if you've aligned your hearts, the intentions of everybody are in one direction, then you will get over those bumps. So it's extremely important. There's a lot of good work done here on how to align intention, and great coaches in this space. So I will end with this. And there's a book that I really like by Mark Nepo. It's called The Book of Awakening. And every day in the year, he has a passage for reflection. And so since we are on March 1st, we didn't have a Feb 29. I picked both Feb 29 and March 1st. And he said, who's to say the effort to be real isn't the beginning of wings? And March 1st is live deep enough, and there is only one direction. So with that, I'd love to hear your questions, take your questions. And if you're so brave as to volunteer, I can even do a demonstration of what I mean by the value mapping process. So now this will go where you want to take it. Yes.
So you said that you talked about the freedom from the conditioning.
Yes.
Is not authenticity also because of conditioning that you want to challenge? Like, what do you feel something about strongly? Maybe it's because of your conditioning.
It could be. But the only way to find out is if you can go into that zone of silence where the clutter stops. So in the yoga traditions, they say like mind is like a lake that's disturbed, and you can't see through the lake unless the waters are still. So you will only know whether it's coming from your deeper space or it's coming from your superficial conditioning if you're still. You've got to find, the question is how are you going to find out?
So my question is that deeper space
Yeah.
is also an effect of conditioning.
It could be. Yeah. It's an open question. Like how deep does your conditioning go? I don't have a good answer, but I do know that when you find your deepest conditioning, it is inspiring in a way that nothing else is. And the other thing, like when you going back to the Mark Nepo quote, right? Live deep enough and there's only one direction. I feel that you will know if it's really authentic, if it's going in that one direction. That one direction is, it will always support life in some powerful way. So I'll give you a kind of gross example, okay, just to make the point. The samurais, right? And this is kind of my conditioning. I get really emotional when I hear these stories. My heart is in when the spirit bursts through limitation, when you've defined boundaries and you accept those boundaries and you still find a way of expressing your spirit. And decision analysis, by the way, is an example of that. We've used the language of accounting, the language of bean counting, to get you to freedom. You know, we're not taking you into the cave to do yoga or meditation. We're saying, nope, just do your math. And if you do this for the next 3 decades, meet a decision analyst who's been in it for a couple of decades, you'll find they're at peace. What's the value of peace? And so the story I was going to give you is the samurai. They were trained to be killers. Their only real purpose was when their master says, take this guy's head off, they take the sword and just take the head off. Okay? That's what they trained for. And in that culture, at that time, it's contextual, you couldn't say no. You couldn't say, no, I want to be a monk. No, then you're not a samurai anymore. Okay? So if you said, okay, I accept samurai spirit, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to take a life. At the same time, in my deepest heart of hearts, I honor life. I respect life. What do? Right? And so there's the deep truth. I respect life. Life is valuable. Clarity of that deep truth is, well, you know what? When I cut in a sloppy way, it causes unnecessary suffering. If I am going to take a life, I'm going to do it quick. I'm going to do it at this particular angle, like a 30-degree angle, and they've practiced with bamboo, which they felt was similar to the human whatever neck. And you couldn't graduate to be a samurai if you didn't make a clean cut. That would be a very bad samurai who had a wavy cut. And behind it was that they expressed their freedom. They're completely bound by these social rules, right? And yet they rebelled against those rules. Their spirit shone forth, and they said, even in this really grotesque thing that they were doing, they would express a respect for life. And that just blows my mind, that even in the darkest of situations, you can find your freedom. And so if I had to map their values, like respect for life is there. And it's expressing itself through these narrow rules of what's the angle of the cut, right? So, I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
So is the value mapping and figuring out what you feel basically in DA terms a way to get your value measures or U curve?
No, my first slide I said that's not what I mean by values.
Okay.
That's what a very narrow community decision analyst will think about. Mm-hmm. When I say values, I mean what is important to you, to your spirit. That's what I mean. So there's a distinction that I made early on, which is the difference between being and doing. So when you talk about value metrics, you're already in the land of doing. You're in the land of trade-offs. And in the land of doing, you have to make trade-offs. Okay? There's no escaping it. Otherwise, you can't take action. So just by being in this class, you're not in all of the other 1,000 wonderful classes at Stanford University. You traded off when you came here. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about who you are. And in that conversation, time doesn't really exist. Uncertainty doesn't exist. Just you are there. And when you can tap into that space, from that stems a doing that's a different kind of doing. In that doing, there is freedom, there is a lot of clarity, and there's power. Like you can build a different world if you can bring what's truly real in you out into the world. That's the hope, that if we can be conscious about that, our decision analysis work will become exceedingly empowering. It becomes a game changer for this planet. It's like every kid, if they knew this, we would be living in a different planet. Yeah.
Earlier on, you said that it may be easy to determine if saving 2 lives was twice as good as saving 1. Could you speak to your experience in medical triage or decisions there?
So medical triage happens in many places. I mean, even police, for instance, when they get calls, they have to decide, they're going to have 3 calls, which one are they going to take? So yes, when you get to the world of action, you have to pick one and not the other. But the moment we start using language like, oh yeah, 3 lives are better than 1, and people do this, and there's a grotesque example from, this is right after the First World War, or during the First World War, Germany was losing a lot of people, okay? And a minister said, oh, we lost 400,000 people. That's not a big deal. We'll make it up in 6 years with our birth rate. Now just think about that argument for a moment, right? There's a bar of blood there, 400,000, and there's climbing babies, and suddenly they're equal. How do you feel about that argument? And in fact, that is what we're doing with any kind of population statistics. That's the starting point for dehumanization. It doesn't matter what population statistics you're doing, that's the starting point. And when you start trading the richness of human life in that way, you already lost the connection to your feelings. So the way Hartman did this, and this is a deeper conversation there, but he said that at the intrinsic level of value, he defined an axiom that life is intrinsically valuable and it is inseparable from who you are if you're feeling it intrinsically. And when he separated these two things, he said that many people often take a construct that's not life and they feel it as inseparable from who they are. If you accept the axiom that life is the only thing that can be intrinsic, then you would call this a valuation mistake. You'd say, well, wait a second, these numbers that I'm feeling, my promotion is intrinsic. Well, no, that's not life. I shouldn't be making it a part of my identity. That's a mistake. For the first time, we have an actual logical calculus to prevent those mistakes. And then he has other dimensions, with practical dimension is a means to an end. So anything that has a physical reality like this table or behavior that you can see in space-time is an extrinsic value. And the last one is a systemic value, which is anything that is completely artificial, a construct. That's in the whole realm of decision analysis is a systemic value. These are constructs, they don't have any reality outside of your head. That's systemic values create the most amount of objectivity, you don't feel them. Whereas practical values, I need this in my life, I need food, blah, 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 okay. But the richest feeling is with the intrinsic value. And if you're always in the intrinsic land, you probably couldn't get through your day because you're it, right? So we're in this game of, stepping out of the intrinsic, and then you go too far out, and then suddenly life has no purpose. So he analyzed it in this way, and it turns out the mathematics that results from it really guides you, just amazingly guides you. So that article will go much deeper into this. But yeah, so we have 10 more minutes. Is anyone feeling, yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if you have any suggestions on where to look for converting values into numbers. Say if you had a decision tree with different alternatives for a career or something, you're trying to figure out which was the optimal decision.
So I would start with the question, who do you want to be? I actually taught a class to high school students called Making the Right College Decision. And there's only one thing I know how to do. I always start with, who do you want to be? And it turns out, if I can map your heart and your habit, if you want, we can try right now, then the head is a question mark. And you will find that you have a starting point for generating alternatives that are true to your heart and true to your habit. And that's a very different way of having the alternative generation conversation. Now, if you have multiple good choices, then I would suggest looking at metrics to see what the trade-offs are, what are the practical situations you have to deal with. But the conversation always starts with, who do you want to be? And in fact, who you are right now. So if you're feeling brave, well, I don't want to volunteer. This is a very sacred conversation. And I recognize that doing it in a public space is very, it requires a lot of courage. If anyone wants to step up, any student here, I'm happy to. You're willing to step up? Okay.
I'm not a student, I'm a visitor.
Okay, that's fine. Would you like to be mapped onto this? We can even get your skin conductance. No, don't come in front of the camera. For your privacy, don't tell me your name. And while I'm wiring him up, I'm going to request everybody to just feel that deep silence within you that, he's stepping up so you can learn. So see if you can feel that gratitude. And come on here and keep the camera away from us for now. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have
It's not tight enough.
oh yeah, that's have to be a little tighter. I'm going to keep one with you, and I have learned to distrust these devices. They sometimes behave weird, so I'm going to plug both on you. So you won't see what happens to me, but I just want to see what happens to you. If I had 4, then I would also plug myself in.
Could you describe a little more when the graph goes up? Like, what does that mean? When it's like up or down?
I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But I find that there is a correlation between when I'm feeling inspired or when the other person's feeling inspired and when there are changes. The weird thing is sometimes the graph goes down at the point when they're having these meaningful experiences. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I don't know. But yeah, please make yourself comfortable. Sit down. Yeah, this is a very simple conversation. This is not magic or anything. So tell me about a few times in your life when you felt whatever was happening to you was really meaningful, or a decision you made that felt really meaningful to you.
So whenever I made a decision to get more freedom in my life, I felt really empowered.
Freedom. Give me some context. Can you give an example?
Like decision to leave my country and move to US, or leave my first job when I was not enjoying it. I was making good money, but I took a risk and I joined a startup. And the startup failed within 3 months. So I started my own company 10 years ago. It was hard, but it was really felt like the right thing to do.
What does your company do?
My previous company was a software services company, consulting business.
And right now, what are you doing?
I started a new company 3 years ago.
What does the company focus on?
The new company, it's a product for technical assessment. It's a testing service for programmers.
And why did you start this company?
Because I wanted to move to US and I don't feel the same passion like my previous company.
So where you are now, you don't feel the passion?
Not the same passion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what would you like to do if money wasn't a problem, if life situation wasn't a problem? What makes you upset about the world the way it is? Where would you like to make a difference?
Explore.
Explore what?
Knowledge.
Will you become a student, for instance, at Stanford?
Yeah, if money was not
So you want to learn?
only.
Okay. And learn what?
Like this one.
Like decision making?
Everything.
Could we put you into the civil and engineering department to study how we construct buildings? No. Okay. So you want to learn something specific? Psychology. Okay.
Psychology, cognitive sciences.
What about cognitive sciences attracts you?
To understanding why do we do what we do.
Why is that
To
important?
predict the human behavior.
Why is that important to you?
I think probably I want to understand myself.
Why?
Why? So that I can get more control
Control?
and get the freedom from the conditioning.
Why is that important?
I don't want to be a slave of my past. I want to create my own life. So I want to know what's out there, who I am right now, and what I want to be. So I can get more clarity, control.
So notice how fluent he is. He's telling me very logical things. Everybody should want whatever he's saying, okay? So I wanted to go a little bit deeper. Where's the juice for you? Like, yes, everybody, I want to get freedom from conditioning. But what is it that you feel is a little bit, makes you more emotional than it would other people? What drives you? Like, are there moments in your life when you've really felt mad because something bad happened in the world around you?
Yeah, so the environment I grew up was not very empowering. Your parents are controlling, for example. I grew up in Pakistan in a very, so that, I think that's something I want to change. So I'm going to probably decentralize the parenthood.
Decentralized parenthood. Okay, so now there's some juice here. Decentralized parenthood. That's deep. So we'll write that down. Love that. Why do you think this is important?
Because this is a fair thing to do. Because luck should not be played. Like luck should not define you. Like where you are born, who your parents are, should not be a defining factor of who you will be. So if we can give the fair chance to everybody, if we give the
So you notice he's struggling for words. This is good.
if we can give the fair chance, like everybody should have a same start.
Now, suppose in your lifetime you come to the end of your life, and you manage to deliver on this.
Oh, awesome.
Just feel it for a moment, few seconds. Just feel it, and then tell me what comes up.
Bodies, you can feel that shaking.
I'm feeling something right now in my body. Are you guys feeling something? Isn't that weird? Okay, there's something. This is a sacred ground. Okay, so I'm going to call that your heart. Now, what shows up when you show up? I'm switching gears. When you are working in your, in your student groups or in your teams, what do they say when you show up? This energy has come into the group.
What do you say?
As in, there's certain habit patterns we all have. What is the one habit pattern you have that you don't remember creating, but you've always had this? Whenever you show up, you look at the world in a certain way, or you do certain things, and if you have a spouse, your spouse might be able to tell you, your friends will be able to tell you, oh, this guy's here now, our conversation is going to go in this direction.
Yeah.
What would that be?
Yeah, I think novelty of finding new grounds, totally new ideas, starting new things.
So in any conversation you enter, you are the guy who's...
Direction. And I switch topics very frequently.
Now, would you say that this has also landed you in trouble? Can you tell me a story of when this has landed you in trouble?
Probably not. No.
But what I'm looking for, your deepest habit, is something that's not a decision for you.
Okay.
And it's your biggest blessing and your biggest curse at the same time.
Okay.
So, is there something you could find that you can't turn it off? Like if I told you, don't come up with new ideas, you'd be like suffocating, like I'm going to die.
Yeah, that.
Okay.
That happens.
So when you have to, for instance, I'm going to make something up, tell me how this fits. When you're building a project and you're doing a project and you have to get it to completion, you have to stick with it and not come up with new ideas for a certain time so you can get to completion.
Actually, this is the painful part.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so I don't finish things unless I have some strong commitments or liability or some consequences. If I don't, then I don't finish.
Okay, so you're a starter.
I'm a starter, yeah.
Okay, so this guy is a starter. So I'm going to put it. See what I did? I did a test, and I've written all of this up so you can see, the specific questions that are floating in my mind. But this is his habit, that when this guy shows up, he can start new things very powerfully. And this is his superpower. So now if he creates a work context where this is a liability, he won't be very successful. He needs to go to a context or create a context where we need a starter, right? And if he's just starting stuff for the heck of it, it has nothing to do with decentralizing parenthood, it's going to be meaningless for him. He's going to always be walking around in his life feeling, what am I supposed to be doing? But now let's put the two together. So if you are going to be doing decentralized parenthood, it's your dream, right?
Yeah.
So what intellectual career can get you that?
Not sure.
Would you like to be, I can just think of a few. For instance, you could be a psychologist working with parents and children. Mm-hmm. You could be an educator for children. You could go to the School of Ed, become a certified educator, start teaching in classrooms where this is happening. You could build a school of your own where this is a theme.
Actually, I want to start a university.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You went for the big one here. University.
Yeah, I know the name. It's called Freedom University.
Freedom. Okay, so this is good. This is very helpful. So you want to be in the education profession, right? Well, and what are you doing right now?
Product.
Okay, well, it's interesting, right? Just look at that.
Kind of works out, no?
Do you have a spouse?
No.
Okay, good. Otherwise, I would be in trouble for educator. This is what you can put on your business card that other people can understand. This is what buys you the right to work on this, and also you have to shape this context in a way that starter is going to be an asset. And educator is actually a pretty good one. You don't have to, you start, your starter projects are the people who are coming to you, you light the fire and then they go off and they are going to be their own project, right? So if you look at it that way, it would be a fantastic fit. And this is you, and don't tell me your name. I would love to know you after the video recording ends. And this is our human being here, right? How does this feel? Look at this. How do you feel when you see this?
Yeah, and this is what I imagine in after 10 years.
But this is not where we started. Could you have come up with this map before we had this conversation?
That was pretty fast.
And now what are you going to do with this? If you had to use 3 phrases to describe you, could you see yourself using these 3 phrases?
That sounds like me.
How weird is that? I'm deeply honored to meet you, and thank you for volunteering. There isn't another human being on this planet who has these 3 phrases defining their soul. And now you answer your own question. You said, well, what about this conditioning? How does this feel? How would you answer your question?
Yeah, so it's of course the result of my conditioning, but this gives a meaning to my life, a purpose. So this is a purpose I would love to live my life for or die for.
I don't know this guy. I've never met him before. This wasn't pre-planned. Okay, this thing is at a level of science. This works every single time. You tap into your feelings, you ask these questions in this way, you can find something very deep about yourself. Well, we are out of, I have been told to stop. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
This conditioning idea, let me paint you an alternative scenario.
Sure.
You're a musician.
Yeah.
You condition yourself 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And it's conditioning. It's physical conditioning. It's mental conditioning. When you get to the end of it, there was there's a study, I don't know if you've looked at it, by Levitan called Your Brain and Music. He's a Stanford guy. It's neurophysiology of music. When you get to that level, you can make decisions that you couldn't make without it. You can improvise music, and what they say is time slows down. Your comment about the body changes. You can feel it.
Yeah.
The Joe Montana book, when he made the famous drive in the 80s in the Super Bowl, he said, that drive took me 6 hours. The world slowed down, but I knew I could get the ball to John Taylor every time. He knew that, and it was from conditioning.
Yeah.
From conditioning.
I'm so glad you made that comment. Because
I think it's really, really important.
I think David's making an excellent and very important point. So when we say freedom, right, we're not saying freedom from conditioning, because you cannot escape conditioning. But what we are saying is, do you want the conditioning that other people have imposed on you, or can you make your own conditioning? And that's where the freedom lies. How would you like your life to be conditioned? He's going to have to condition his life to create that reality, right? But that's his making. That's the first time in his life when he will actually be a creator. He is going to bring something beautiful into this world that is him, right? And that's what's so powerful about this. So, yeah, thank you for listening. What an absolute privilege to be able to talk to you. Thank you. Thank you.